All right, so let's go over the solve by factoring portion of the test review. So starting with number 14. When we're solving by factoring, the very first thing that we want to do is get the equation equal to 0. So in this one, I noticed that there's a negative 24 on the other side of the equal sign. So I'm going to go ahead and add 24 to both sides. And now I've got 2x squared plus 14x plus 24 equals 0. And notice how I was sure to write it in standard form too. So x squared, then the x term, then the constant. Now, before I go ahead and do big X factoring, I want to see if there's a GCF that I could factor out first. So I'm going to look at all three terms, the 2x squared, the 14x, and the 24. Is there a greatest common factor between the three? And there is. The GCF would be 2. So I'm going to factor out a 2, and I'm left with x squared plus 7x plus 12. Now, when I have that GCF out front and I'm solving, right now, because the GCF is just a number, I could divide it out. So if I divide both sides by 2, 2 divided by 2, those would cancel, and 0 divided by 2 is just 0. So I would get x squared plus 7x plus 12 equals 0. And now I can factor this one using big X. So I'm going to draw the X. Remember, C goes on top, so 12 on top, and B is on the bottom, 7's on the bottom. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to 7. And those two numbers would be 3 and 4, because 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 plus 4 is 7. So in our factored form, we get x plus 3 times x plus 4 is equal to 0. Now that we've factored, we can go ahead and solve by setting each of the factors equal to 0. And then I'm going to solve each one. So for x plus 3 equals 0, I would subtract 3 from both sides. I get x equals negative 3. And then for x plus 4 equals 0, I would subtract 4 from each side, get x equals negative 4. And I'm going to list them together. X equals negative 3, comma, negative 4. All right, so let's look at number 15. For 15, I have x squared equals negative 20x minus 100. So for this problem, I want to move everything to one side, but I also want to try to keep x squared positive. So I'm going to move the negative 20x and the negative 100 to the left side of the equation. So I'm going to do that by adding 20x to both sides. So I get x squared plus 20x equals negative 100. And now I'll add 100 to both sides. And again, I decided to move these over to the left so that I could keep x squared positive. Otherwise, you'd have to take other steps to try to make it positive. And now it's equal to 0, and I've written it in standard form. Okay, so now we're going to try to factor using big X. So I'm going to set up the X. I've got 100 on top because C goes on top, and 20 on the bottom. Two numbers that multiply to 100 and add to 20 would be 10 and 10. 10 times 10 is 100, 10 plus 10 is 20. So we go to our factored form, we get x plus 10 times x plus 10 equals 0. Now when I solve this, I'm going to set each one equal to 0. And solving for x here, I'd subtract over 10, get x equals negative 10. And notice the second factor, these two factors are exactly the same. So they get me the same solution. So really, you don't even have to solve the second one. X equals negative 10 is your answer. This problem only has one solution. All right, let's look at number 16. So you could do different methods to solve this, but this section specifically asks us to factor. So if I'm looking at this problem and trying to factor it, I notice it is a difference of two squares. 16x squared and 25 are both perfect squares, and there's a subtraction sign between them. So difference of two squares. When I factor a difference of two squares, I want to take the square root of the first term. So the square root of 16x squared is 4x. And I want to find the square root of the second term. So the square root of 25 is 5. And I use those numbers to build up my factors. So we get our two factors equal to 0. The 4x goes first in both parentheses. The 5 goes second. And 1 is plus and 1 is minus. So we get two different factors, but they're very similar. We get 4x plus 5 times 4x minus 5. Now we're factored, and we can go ahead and just set each one equal to 0 and solve. So for this one, even though they look similar, they're not the same. So you do have to solve both of these. When I solve over here, I'm going to start by subtracting 5 from each side. So we get 4x equals negative 5. And then I'm going to divide by 4 on each side. I get x equals negative 5 fourths. For this one, I'd start by adding 5 over. Get 4x equals 5. And then divide by 4. X equals 5 fourths. And so there are two solutions to this factoring problem. All right, let's take a look at number 17. So for 17, I notice that it's already set equal to 0. I see there's a number in front of x squared. So the first thing I definitely want to check for is there a GCF? But for this one, there isn't. So I just need to go straight to big X factoring. When I factor and there is an a, so a number in front of x squared, it changes the steps a little bit. The first thing it changes is that on the top of our big X, it's no longer just C, but it's C times A. So the top of our big X is going to be 16 times 5, which is 80. Now, B always goes on the bottom by itself. I say B on the bottom by itself, so it's just negative 42 on the bottom. And now I need two numbers that multiply to a positive 80, but add to a negative 42. And that would be negative 40 and negative 2. Because a negative times a negative is a positive, so we get positive 80. And negative 40 plus negative 2 is a negative 42. Now, here's the second part that's different because we had this 5 out front. So we multiplied by 5 up top. Now we need to divide by 5 on the sides before we put them into our factors. And when you divide by 5, also you want to check to see if you can simplify the fraction. So does it divide evenly or does it simplify? Negative 40 divided by 5, I can reduce down to a negative 8. And then negative 2 divided by 5, that does not simplify at all. So we leave that one as is, and I can start putting these into our factors. So we get x minus 8 times x minus 2/5 equals 0. And now before I go ahead to solve, this is not okay. We need to do bottoms up. So we don't like to leave the fraction. We swing the denominator up to be with the x. It becomes the coefficient of x. So really our factors are x minus 8 times 5x minus 2. And it's equal to 0. Now to finish solving this, I set each factor equal to 0. So x minus 8 equals 0. And 5x minus 2 equals 0. And I solve for x. So for x minus 8, I would add 8 to both sides and get x equals positive 8. And then for 5x minus 2, I would add the 2 over first. 5x equals 2. And then divide by 5, and x equals 2/5. There's our two answers for that one.